Now, so we look at something like the Papyrus in Singer. This is a fairly late Egyptian document. By late, I mean about 3rd century BC. Yeah. For me, anything even Persian is post-interesting. But at any rate, you take a look at a document like this, which is talking about the kinds of creative activities. And this is well into the Hellenistic period already. But when they talked about creation, look at the things that they included in their list. And you can read through it as well as I can. We see some things very familiar there at the front, light and darkness and things like that. But then look at all of these things. Month, day, and year. Well, we recognize those from day 4 in Genesis, okay, with the signs, seasons, days, and years, right? But then food and constellations, breath in the egg, sleeping and waking. I'm just picking out a couple of them. But you can see that what we have here is not so much a grocery list of the material elements of the cosmos. It's rather a list of some of the most important functions of the cosmos. And again, this gets back to the idea of how do things work? Not what they're made of, how do they work? Because that's every bit as much a part of creation. And for the ancient Egyptians, at least, it was the most important part of creation. Who's in charge? How does it work? Now, in ancient Mesopotamia, they've got a number of pieces that talk about the old slaying of the chaos monster. In ancient Mesopotamia, lots of the concepts of creation come through conflict, battle between the gods and some threats against order. And so the idea of bringing order out of a chaotic situation was part of how they thought about it in ancient Mesopotamia. Not all the time, but some of the documents go in that direction. We have a number of Babylonian creation accounts. I just listed a couple of the key ones there, the most well-known ones, Atrahasis and Enuma Elish. Enuma Elish, you'll hear me refer to several times. I'll also call it the Babylonian creation epic. It's the most important of the creation documents that we have. The final form that we have dates from about the 12th century BC, which is roughly the time when the Judges period is going on in the Bible. And in this document, it's mostly about the way that Marduk became the chief god of the Babylonian pantheon. He had to defeat some enemies, some threats to order in the cosmos in order to do it. And there's his acts of creation to set up the cosmos under his power and authority. Again, you can see who's in charge is a question here. And then he ends up by building his temple in Babylon, and his 50 great names are proclaimed. So it's a praise hymn for Marduk, but in the process it has a lot of creation information in it. So in one place, in Enuma Elish, this is tablet 5, there are 7 tablets. You can see the text there. He made the day. The year was indeed equal. After the days, the watches of the night. It talks about Tiamat, who was his enemy. He created, and we have the clouds and the wind and the rain, heaping up dirt in the spring and the Tigris and Euphrates, and you can see all of that element there. Again, we see here that there are certain elements. We see the issue of time and how time operates. In the first couple lines there, the day and the year, the watches of the night. And then we can see the issue of weather, about the clouds and the wind and the rainfall. And then finally we can see the whole idea of fertility and setting up the whole process whereby things can grow with the fecundity and the Tigris and Euphrates and all of that. So in Enuma Elish, in the creation acts of Marduk, making the system work. Now, what we find as we look at the ancient Near Eastern cosmological texts, and here I'm starting to synthesize from a number of them, from both Egypt and from Mesopotamia. We don't have any cosmology texts from Canaan. But as we start to synthesize this, first of all, we see little interest concerning material origins. They're, for the most part, not interested in the material aspects of the cosmos. They're interested in the operational aspects, the functional aspects, the issues of authority and jurisdiction. Secondly, and not surprisingly, given the first one, we see that the pre-creation state is typically absent of function. So they usually start with sort of a situation in which nothing's working, nothing's operating right, whether it's because there's been some threat to it that's undermined it, or whether because it just hasn't been ordered and set up yet. And so everything's not working yet. And that's where it starts. It doesn't start with no material, it starts with no functions. And then it moves to breeding functionality and operations. Thirdly, then we find that the creative activities in the ancient world involve giving functions. In Mesopotamia, this is reflected primarily in the idea of making decrees, setting up sort of the framework of how things operate. And so the gods decree that certain things should have certain functions. And those decrees are found in activities such as separating, naming, giving roles, assigning roles in the cosmos. And so those are the creative activities, and they're stated as being creation. And then finally, we also find that the cosmos and the temple are often connected together. Sorry for that big word, homological, but it just means that they're correlated, they're related together as having to do with the same kind of thing. Now, the temple in the ancient world was where the cosmos was run from. If you think of our American political model, it would be the Oval Office. This is where things run. This is where things happen. And so the idea that a deity was in his temple, all is right with the world. Oh, that's from the Bible. Okay, but that idea that's God's role in the temple. I mean, it's not just a place where he kind of can relax and get away from the press of the crowd. You know, it's where he does his work. It's the control room. It's the hub. It's the central control room for the cosmos. And that's why people wanted to have temples for the gods, so that the gods could do their work. And that's why they took care of the gods. In the ancient world, they believed that gods had needs. Of course, Israel doesn't agree with that idea, but, well, too often they did, but they weren't supposed to. But that the gods had needs and that they were to take care of them. And that as you took care of the gods, then the gods would be free to do their work. It's sort of like the Secret Service today, who takes its job to protect the president and protect the job that he's doing to prevent ready access to the place where he is, so that he can do his work unimpeded by interruptions that would disrupt. And so in that sense, that's what temples were for. So these are some of the things that we find as we look at the ancient Near Eastern texts. The lack of attention to material, where they start, the before and after pictures. What's it look like before and after when they describe creation? The functional aspects of creation, and then the connection to the temple. Now, maybe for some of you this is a new word, ontology. Getting a little philosophical here, just have to prove I'm an academic, throw out a word you don't know or something. But lots of you probably know it. It took me a long time to learn it. But anyway, ontology just is a general way of talking about what does it mean for something to exist. You could talk about the ontology of evil. What does it mean for evil to exist, and why does evil exist? But of course, you can also talk about cosmic ontology. What does it mean when we say that something exists? It's an interesting question. When we talk about it today and say, what do we mean when we say that something exists? That this podium exists or a chair exists. Our scientific way today is a material way of thinking. We typically judge that things exist when they have appeal to one of our five senses. So we can see them or hear them or bump into them, most likely. It's a very material kind of definition. Now, granted, we have things like love. Love exists. But aside from those kind of abstractions, still in the cosmos way of thinking, as we think about our world, something exists when it has material properties. Now, of course, physicists have been challenging that as they talk about dark matter and all of those kinds of things. I'm out of my world there. I'm not the scientist. But still, the idea of existence is a very material element in our way of thinking. One of the main things I have to suggest to you tonight is one that I've already broached in a couple of the previous slides, that in the ancient world that was not so.